Angel, how are you doing?
Good, and you? Good to meet you.
Well, I'm a teacher of, this is my 39th year of teaching, and quite a different and varied experience from KZN rural up in Zululand and now in Cape Town. So the experience is quite different from those two contexts. But you as the head of CSR and recognized as an author, and also in the African context especially, your experience in talks around resilience, in the sense of the collective resilience. And you explore this here in your book, Flocking Together. Could you tell us why, for teachers, you regard resilience as critical and crucial?
Nice question, thank you. I grew up in Newcastle, so KZN rural space is really familiar to me, and my mom was a teacher for about 45 years. So I really have kind of nested knowledge, if you want, of the teaching profession. I was sharing with Kaylin and Lynn that my daughter just started as a grade 1 teacher this year, and she's all abuzz with the excitement of it. So I like to always think that South Africa is like a laboratory for looking at resilience. We're a living lab for resilience. Whenever we think of resilience, or rather we would only think of the construct resilience if there is significant challenges, significant adversity. Otherwise, resilience doesn't come into play. We would think of coping and managing and life skills, but resilience means there are particular significant challenges that people need to adapt to. So in a South African space, with or without COVID, there are more than enough adversities and challenges that the teacher needs to think of. We seldom do teachers have the luxury of only thinking of themselves as a facilitator of teaching and learning. Very seldom. Teachers in a space such as South Africa need to think of a child who may have live, if you think of a rural space, in a child-headed household, or live with grandparents where parents migrate and work in cities. In an urban space, it may be possible that children who live in spaces of low socioeconomic income have difficulty traveling to school, come to school hungry, may not have the right school uniform or stationery to work with. Children who come from spaces where there may be more privilege, more socioeconomic privilege, have at the back of their minds, teachers and children, the high instances of crime and violence that are evident in our societies. The problems we have amongst young people of feeling deflated and people feeling that their expectations and aspirations may be problematic or challenged, and may struggle with things like substance abuse. So all of those contextual, you mentioned context, contextual adversities mean that in education, teachers and school leaders have to think of resilience as a way to adapt in a positive way to those challenges.
Okay. Yes, thank you very much for that. Your book, Flocking Together, is a uniquely South African notion of this response to stress. Usually we talk about fight and flight as responses to stress. But you've introduced something actually different, from fright to flight to fight, and now to flock. So am I right in assuming to a certain degree that there are certain principles of Ubuntu that are embedded in your idea of flocking together?
Absolutely. So first off, I need to give a nod to people with whom I worked So I feel that I just pinned down a mechanism that exists already. So although I choose to call this flocking, this is behavior that we saw amongst young people and elders across Southern Africa in urban and rural spaces, amongst young people and elders, also in Swaziland, also in Namibia. And what we saw, and you are spot on, is that the way that this philosophy of Ubuntu manifests in behavior, I opted to call flocking. It could have many, many other names. It is exactly that it is inconceivable for somebody coming from a collective philosophical base, such as Ubuntu, to even think that they would only manage challenges to help themselves. And so flocking is the behavior manifestation of the heart space and the head space of Ubuntu. It's how we see Ubuntu.
Yes, yes. Okay, thank you for that. Your recent article in the Mail and Guardian talked about how COVID has led to other countries also starting to build on this collaboration that you are referring to right now. For teachers who are trying to teach in the middle of a pandemic, such as us, facing the challenges that you've just mentioned, I'd like to ask, what resilience enabling strategies can we build at this time?
So say we had opted only for kind of Western, independent and competitive strategies during COVID. It could have led to much more individual fight, flight, swarm, faint behavior. What we saw across the globe was much more take up of flocking behavior. So social support and collective well-being strategies. And teachers who during COVID were isolated and not included, for example, in WhatsApp groups. So leadership who may not have made use of platforms such as WhatsApp to collectively get people together and say, listen, guys, this is our problem. What can we do? And kind of draw in on the collective knowledge for strategies to adapt would have fallen short. So even in spaces where there are limited resources, where there was struggles to access information technology, across those spaces, we saw that people did make use of collective strategies. So what this tells us for future probably is that, and we see this in so many spaces, I'm sure you see it in your school, we see it at the university, if there aren't smaller clusters of social networks, to first acknowledge that social mobilization is necessary, two, that social resources can all be pulled together, and then three, come up with, consult on it, which is also a really African approach to first consult, then have consensus on what to do, and then to implement. And then those, say WhatsApp groups, even though it's contentious at the moment, but say it could be Telegram or it could be any of the others, also serve as mechanisms to monitor and evaluate how those teaching strategies or management strategies for education or resourcing actually are implemented. So accountability is also part of flocking.
Yes, thanks for that. Just as an aside, there's a reference made in one of your articles about a kind of global movement like you've just referred to. In India, people have gotten together, the whole sense of community, a reawakening almost. In Tunisia, people getting together, people in certain Italian villages having live shows or singing aloud. Do you suppose our own version of a collective sing dance called Jerusalem has some significance in this? Besides the fact that it has a spiritual message, spiritual dimension to it, just the creation of the feel-good stuff?
Yeah, you give me goosebumps when you say that. So I think Jerusalem is like it's a crystallization of so many positive psychology as a pathway to resilience thinking. So Jerusalem has positive emotions, né? So you have the joy of that, you have the belonging of that, you have the sense of community of that. Jerusalem has the positive traits. It is the singing, it is the words, it is the dancing, it's all of these things coming together in one action. And it has the positive institutions. So Seligman has these as the 3 pillars for positive psychology. And the positive institutions are something that with Jerusalem and probably COVID, and if you think of flocking as collective well-being responses to collective distress, then the positive institutions awakened by Jerusalem is more than it could ever have been predicted. It got a life of its own across the world, and impacted on the positive emotions and well-being of so many communities. We would not ever, I think, be able to know what the reach was of that collective well-being, that flocking.
Yes, thank you very much for that. Can you give us South Africans a little bit of hope to emerge stronger after the pandemic, and in a way that meets your definition of flocking? Are there certain things that we could do to emerge stronger, create a new hope?
Yeah, I actually would like to flip that question, Carl, and I would like to say that I think all of us are actually learning from South Africans. So the lived experiences of what South Africans are currently doing, those experiences are teaching researchers and I think teachers and school leaders what hope is, and teaching us, showing us what the behaviors and mechanisms are that make schools, learners, teachers, parents not only keep afloat, but actually have those wonderful moments of thriving as well. I think that's on the one hand. Also, what this pandemic does, and HIV and AIDS did the same, it was a gift to challenge inequality. It shows us exactly where the root of the evil is that requires strategies so that hope can soar.
And flourish,
yes. So we know that we've known for a long time. You were in rural schools. If I go to rural schools and there's no water or sanitation, COVID has shown us why do we still not have water and sanitation? And what then can we come up? What we see in communities is that school communities, school leaders come up with strategies for clean water and sanitation at schools. So collective well-being means not waiting passively, but proactively addressing and adapting. I have a wonderful colleague, Professor Funke Omadire, who comes from Nigeria. And Nigeria has, I think, 60 years of democracy. And the instances of flocking behavior there is tremendous. So where people have realized the need to address inequality is so high that it's too high for only the government to do. It's too high for only the business sector to do. So at citizenship level, there are many actions to address and water, sanitation, transport, name it, education. And I think COVID has shown us at education level how much parents can do, how much teachers can do. Whether or not it's sustainable is a different question, because I think all the poor parents have burnout. And I think the teachers, I look at teachers after last year and I wonder how on earth there must be such fatigue. but yet people go on, they commit, they are optimistic, and they persevere.
Yes, and they persevere. Yes, yes. Thank you for that. And if I may just add to that, we do have, like you've just mentioned, examples in our communities of people flocking together on that principle in order to assist for the greater good. For example, old people need medication. So you have younger people, younger children, or whoever, supporting them, either taking them to the clinics to fetch medication or fetching on their behalf. We have youth in communities who offer their services as tutors because they are living in a house where, with alternate classrooms operating in schools, those children are available at home. And if you can assist with some of the homework, so there's wonderful examples of this kind of collaboration which is happening, and it builds the sense of community that you alluded to earlier. So it's all very positive.
Absolutely, yes. Absolutely. I think we are all learning. I think the creativity and innovation that comes from community level is showing government at policy level, researchers at science level, teachers at professional level, showing us what can be done.
What can be done, yes.
It's awakening all our thinking of strategies to adapt.
A whole creative energy that's emerging from this.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's all good.
Absolutely.
Yes.
It's like a Jerusalem all of its own in education.
Indeed, yes. Liesl, if I wanted as a teacher to collaborate with my colleagues and I wanted to start a whole flocking thing at school and take it to a different level. At the moment, I'm on contact probably with half of my children via the WhatsApp groups and so on. But if I really wanted to go deeper, go to the next level as a teacher in my school with my colleagues and my peers, the main thing I'm sort of alluding to here is how can you give us strategies in order to access some of those critical resources that would be essential to have us start? How would we start? What would this thing start to look like as we go down the road? What are the things to look out for?
Sure, lovely question. I think the start would probably be to acknowledge that social networks already exist. So within any given school, learners already have WhatsApp groups amongst themselves, parents have WhatsApp groups amongst themselves, class teachers with their parents, teachers already, probably the school leadership or school governing body and principals, they probably have an executive committee leadership. So I think it would be interesting to start mapping what is present already. And then collective well-being stems from, or at least from a resilience perspective, the collective well-being would be mobilized. Strategies for collective well-being would be mobilized if there's collective distress. So it would be to acknowledge for each of those existing social networks, for each of those social media groups, what drives them? What I would be hesitant to say necessarily distress, but what is the thing that drives them to keep on connecting with each other? Is it that they want emotional support? Is it that they just want a space? So flocking usually speaks to its, scientifically it links with instrumental social support. And instrumental social support is either implicit or explicit. If it's implicit, it's for emotional support. So people wanting to belong together. So that kind of feel good. We're not alone in this. We can do this together. And look at this funny meme I found and read this inspirational story. And the other one is the explicit instrumental support, where people want something specifically. They want information. They want a worksheet. They want a timetable. They want technical assistance with access. I'm just thinking now of the learning space. I would think that for every role that a teacher and a learner have at school and a parent, there would be certain explicit needs that they would want addressed through flocking, explicit instrumental support. So I think once the mapping is done, it would be to try and understand in consultation with those groups, what would the things be that you would like all of us to collaborate on? Let's consult on that. Let's reach consensus on that, and then let's mobilize these social platforms for that. And later on, when we can actually be in person again, how will we actually have that school community mechanisms in schools to help the flocking along? Yes. But we can never assume that it's not there. I can predict that in most schools, flocking in some form would be there. It's for us to actually graft onto that and then include it in our operations.
Yes, thank you, Lisa. I would suppose to a greater degree, it would be easier for urban-based schools to gain access to resources, especially the material kind of resources, than certain rural schools, because contextual factors. Rural schools are more isolated and they're far away from everybody. It's difficult to have companies get involved when they're far away. And also,
dog going, apologies.
And also in the urban setting, there are more people that you can network with, which are people who are employed and connected to different companies. So there's always someone somewhere that you can get in touch with. So I do understand when you say it's a matter of trying to build on what is existing and then moving forward from there. Because even in that group, there may be somebody who has access to someone somewhere in a rural place, or even in the local rural leadership, the traditional leadership. There might be someone who could access either a community-based organization or an NGO or something like that, which could help them to have some kind of access to the resource.
Yeah. It's so nice to speak with you, because it's clear from how you're talking that you understand a rural context so well, that you have lived experience there. Because I agree, I think the only difference between rural and urban is proximity to resources. So the resources are there, and definitely, as you explained, they are accessible through networks. Social networks will link you. The people you know will link you to the resources you have. But if you're isolated socially, not isolated geographically, if you're isolated socially, if you're excluded from communities for whatever reason, then flocking falls flat. Because how do you, in the absence of social networks, access social resources? Then you need to be included.
Yeah, thanks for that. The context in my school, for example, in an urban setting, we are able to make use of the alumni of the school, the local ratepayers, church groups, ladies groups in communities locally. So there's that extensive network that you can touch base with. Then there's also local business. There are always people that are prepared to assist you. And even if it's 10 local businesses that give you a small contribution, at the end, it amounts to a big contribution. So you can do something with it. So it's also a matter of keeping the lines of communication open, keeping the relationships going and building new ones and moving with them. So yes, all that is so valuable.
That's phenomenal, because it's kind of, so if I think of Kretschmann and McNutt's work on asset-based community development, they have a model called ABCD. So asset-based community developments map the assets in your space, mobilize those assets, and then a community, there can be change in a space. And what I like, so the anecdotally, what you're sharing is that example, and then together with that, I think this flocking in South Africa, because there is such high frequency of collective distress, we see it often as a strategy for collective well-being, because it doesn't take a lot of money. It takes people who are linked and who are willing to look for assets or strengths or resources in the environment and creatively link those together so that a particular challenge can be addressed. And it usually sustains, because people buy into this collective philosophy of wanting to do something well together.
Yeah, Thank you, Liesel. That's all that I have to ask about. So I want to thank you again for your Kaylin tells me we've got 5 minutes left. I want to thank you for your contributions and for willingly sharing your expertise and your knowledge in this area. There's one thing that I saw on one of the videos that I was looking at. The organizations, APSI and REPSI, and the work that they do. They're based in South Africa and they work in Southern Africa. Do you have any access to the work they do, or do you contribute in any way to some of the expertise?
I really enjoy collaborating with them. They are probably in sub-Saharan Africa one of the largest organizations looking at well-being, psychosocial well-being of children, young people, and women.
Yes.
Last year they created this amazing manual looking at flocking that they are going to use in training community level caregivers who can work in community spaces, so schools, clinics, faith-based organizations, to just mobilize the strategies of flocking. And we're hoping that the University of Pretoria, we in negotiations that there can be a diploma training on it, so that this really natural way of dealing with adversity
Yes.
can be acknowledged, and that people can use it in their practice where they want to look at the well-being of others. I'll send it through to you, Kaylin and Lynn. And
yes, thank you.
Yes,
I'd like to read a bit more about that. Yes.
Yeah.
In particular, what encourages me is your reference to, in the African context, organizations such as the one we are talking about, APSI and REPSI, and the focus that they have on building community through empowering women and children. And now, for me, that is an important thing, because the context is that we have a paternalistic approach to community structures in many of these places. So it works quite nicely with what the UN Secretary General was talking about last year, that you may have a pandemic which brings a lot of suffering, and yet within that there's a new opportunity which may come, because it gives opportunity for other people to come to the fore with their own talents. So mothers and women and young children, there's a whole new energy which can come in. So that's encouraging.
I so agree. I often joke with colleagues, we work in transdisciplinary teams, and then they say, but we just the soft sciences. It's the hardcore medical sciences, and well, they also think that economic sciences are soft sciences. But if it hadn't been for the collective sciences with a challenge such as COVID, it would not have been enough to just have medical scientists working on a vaccine during these last 18 months. We needed all the knowledge from all the levels of people in their household level, in a community structure level, at school level, at government level, in universities. That collective knowledge from all the spaces made it possible for all the societies to go on and not to feel overwhelmed. So yeah, I agree with you. All of that was needed, and it created more opportunity than not. I was also thinking, Cole, for school leadership, where for me, I think school leadership, the core is creating the conditions and climate in which enablement is possible. So that that enablement can go to good learning, to well-being, and to health. And COVID has shown us how flocking can help. How school leadership can create conditions and climate if they acknowledge that flocking, something like flocking matters, that you need to work collectively, collaboratively, in order to overcome the stress. It wouldn't help for every teacher to just think, well, I'm ignoring what the others are doing. I'm just going to teach mine, and I'm using a different platform to all of the others. And for my parents, I'm giving this little workbook, because then the kids in my class can really learn. Those things couldn't work.
Couldn't work, yes.
Couldn't work.
Yes. Liesl, thank you very much.
Carl, I hope you are going to write a book. I would want to see your book on all those amazing strategies that are being implemented in your school. That would be phenomenal. It is really.
I'll try when I retire.
I think what you could use one of these technologies where you just talk into a machine and it describes your book for you, and you just
provide the text.
Yes.
Yes, that's a good place to start, I think. Yes. When I'm walking the dogs, I can just be talking there and then download it at home onto the processor, and it produces a text.
Exactly.
Yeah, something like that. Yes. Anyway, thanks very much, Liesl. You have a good day and a wonderful year.
Likewise.
Thank you.